Hi friends, if you're new here, welcome. You may remember I made this dress back in the spring, and I think I mentioned in that video that it was meant to be part of a sort of Ren Faire style history-bounding outfit, and that I would do that in the fall, and guess what? It's the fall and I've done it. So this outfit consists of the chemise dress that I already made, and then a boned conical pair of stays slash bodice. It's half boned or even less than half boned, honestly, and a skirt that is basically just a simple 18th century petticoat. Both of these are made out of hemp fabric. I already had these fabrics and I think they're really fun, kind of earthy fall colors, and they go well together. So my idea with the bodice of this outfit was to make something that was kind of, you know, very historically inspired. But what I found in the past with things like this is that I don't end up wearing them much because it takes forever to lace them up. I do not have time in the morning to be sitting there with a needle, like lacing. I mean, I did it today, so what can I say? But this is to film. Normally, I would, you know, just not have time for that. If I'm looking at my closet trying to figure out what to wear, the chance that I'll reach for something that takes a long time to lace up versus something that doesn't is pretty low. So I wanted to hide a zipper in the side. And honestly, the zipper is not very well hidden. It also doesn't match the fabric, but I went with an invisible zipper and I put it upside down because if I put it right side up, the connected part would be at the waist, which is the smallest part, so I would still have to unlace that to get it over my hips or shoulders. So I put an invisible zipper upside down so I can optimize my use of the zipper and have the least amount of unlacing necessary to put on and take off this bodice. I started by redrawing a little inspiration picture, as you can see here in the corner. The bodice, I wanted to just draft something from scratch. Nothing really very scientific. I just kind of made something up. I just started drawing something, used measurements, and compared to the measurements that I knew that I wanted in this. I wanted something that wouldn't really give me waist compression or reduction, but would be a little bit snug on the waist and would give me a little bit of bust support with the top slightly open. So a little bit of a lacing gap at the top and not really a lacing gap at all at the waist. So for the measurements, it's about exactly my snug waist measurement at the waist. And then for the bust, it's around 4 inches smaller than my normal natural bust. Those ratios may not transfer exactly to other bodies, but you can kind of figure out like what your supported reduced bust measurement would be and go off of that if you're doing something similar. This is not a tutorial though, I just made it up as I was going along. So then I went ahead and created a mock-up for the bodice using this really thick upholstery fabric. So I fit the mock-up. It was pretty close, but I wanted to take out a little bit of space in the side and kind of curve the side seam in a little bit. I decided to create this pattern in just 4 parts, 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces that are symmetrical. It had to have that side seam because it had to have the zipper, and I felt like doing it symmetrically on both sides rather than having one side connected and one side with a zipper. I don't know, just seemed like the way to do it. I also decided to just separate the straps off and piece that together so that it would be a little bit more fabric efficient, because cutting a piece with like long skinny straps gives you kind of very awkward offcuts of fabric. But anyways, after my mock-up was fit, I moved on to final fabric, which is this gorgeous green hemp, and then I'm lining it with this gray stripe cotton poly blend sheet that you've seen in a few videos now. It's quite structured and it seemed like a good choice for this. I didn't want to use anything super structured like a coutil or a canvas, but I think this did give me enough structure because the hemp itself is not the most structured fabric out there. So the first thing I did was to piece the straps on. I just laid them right sides together, and as far as pressing the seams, I decided to press the seam allowances up on the outer fabric and down on the lining fabric. So to begin construction, I sewed the center front line of the outer fabric and lining right sides together. I also sewed the center back seam on both the outer and lining fabrics. Then I sewed the side seam on the left side of both the lining and outer fabric. The side seam on the right is where the zipper is going, which is why it's left open. Then I sewed the bottom right sides together. So I did this on both the front right piece, which is on its own, and then the left and the back is connected, and I clipped the bottom edge there and sewed that by machine. Then I trimmed and clipped the corners and pressed everything right side out. At this point, I basted everything together to create and mark out my boning channels. I hadn't previously created a design for my boning channel, so I kind of just made something up here. I decided to do a center front boning channel and then a space for eyelets, which are hand-done eyelets, which you all voted for. Some of you voted for on Instagram. It was a little bit of a close poll, but it ended up being kind of 40-60 towards hand-sewn eyelets, so that is what I did. And then I did 2 on the front coming out diagonally, which is historically inspired, but not, you know, specifically historically accurate to any one thing. I did 2 coming out diagonally in the back, and then 1 more on either side diagonally on the back at a slightly different angle. To mark out these channels, I laid the layers together and then I drew them out with a ruler and a pencil on the lining side, which I found that this actually left a little bit of a just kind of indentation on the hemp fabric on the outside, which was wonderful because it gave me a line to follow. But before I found that out, I marked these out with tailor's tacks so I would have those symmetrical markings on both sides. But yeah, I just went ahead and sewed my boning channels coming up from the bottom on all of them because the bottom is already sewn together, so I can't really have that shift around. So I wanted to start there and then come up to the top where the edges are separate, and it's okay if it shifts a little bit. Once the boning channels were created, but before I actually put boning in them, I inserted my invisible zipper. I will not give a tutorial for it, but there are plenty of wonderful invisible zipper tutorials out there. I went with this navy blue one because it was the closest that I had, which is not very close at all, but I mean, it's better than like a neon orange zipper. And of course the zipper is inserted upside down, like I said, so it zips down from under the armpit, which I will say is quite awkward to do. This garment, I do think it ended up being easier to put on and take off than if the zipper wasn't there, but the zipper is still a bit of a pain in the ass. So I mean, I think if I had help, like it's not that the zipper is sticky, it's just it's a really awkward angle to like get all the way under your armpit, and then you have to pull the edge up so there's tension. Anyways, the zipper was inserted on only the outer fabric, and then I folded the lining fabric in and basted and sewed that by hand with some strong linen thread. I will say, this zipper is put in fairly securely, but it's not secure enough that I would want to have this for like a structural garment that I'm actually trying to get waist reduction with. It's strong enough for the slight compression and the support that I'm looking for, but if you're trying to make a corset top that will actually give you waist reduction, you probably want to put your zipper in a little bit more securely and probably use more layers of more structured fabric and have that fabric really anchored to your zipper rather than just having one layer and having it be by hand. I digress. So then I did my hand-done eyelets with some silk buttonhole twist, just the standard stabbing holes with an awl and creating those eyelets, going around once with a whip stitch and then opening up the hole a little bit more and going around again. Then I tried to figure out what kind of boning to put in this because I have a few different kinds of boning currently. I ended up going with a modern thin sew-in boning for the front because it was a little bit wider than the thicker plastic boning that I had. And I tried to first like melt the edges and apply a ribbon to cover them, which is one way that people finish off edges on this type of boning. That ended up being a little bit tricky, so I ended up just melting the edges, and it wasn't the most soft edge, but I think it'll be okay. If not, I'll update you on Instagram if the boning ends up poking through the fabric. For the back, I had sewn the boning channels a little bit narrower, so I went with a more normal kind of synthetic whalebone style plastic boning for the back. Originally, I was going to finish it with some twill tape, which I dyed green, hence the green on my hands. If you've been wondering why my hands are green, it's fabric dye. But it came out, as you can see, a little bit too blue, and it was kind of clashing with my outer fabric, so I decided to just go with self fabric for the binding, and I think that was the right choice. To sew on the binding, I trimmed down my edge so it was clean and symmetrical all around, and then sewed the binding on the outside by machine and turned it around to the other side, folded the edge under, and sewed that by hand. The last thing I did was add the last 4 eyelets by hand on the ends of the straps and the top of the front so I could tie those together. So for the skirt, it is a basic 18th century petticoat. For the waistband, I just did my favorite terrible quality twill tape, which I have ranted about before. If I end up wearing this skirt a lot, I may need to replace the twill tape in the future, which will be fine. Anyways, for the skirt, I just cut out 2 rectangles. The first thing that I did there was to fold the top edge under 1.5 inches and press it. This fabric has already been pre-washed multiple times, so I'm not too worried about this edge fraying even more. It's frayed about as much as it's going to, and because there's a whole 1.5 inches there, if it frays a little bit more, that's not a big deal. Then I found the center and marked it with chalk and a pin, and then I marked out from the center in 1.5 inch increments all the way to almost the edge. I just kind of eyeballed this and was like, 1.5 inches looks like a good measurement to start with. Pleated it down until it was about the length that I needed, which I actually miscalculated and made it a little bit too wide. So I have about 3 to 4 inches of overlap on either side when I put this petticoat on, which I think is a little bit more than you're supposed to have. Anyways, once I had all of my pleats pinned, I whip stitched it onto the twill tape. I just cut a length of twill tape that I knew would be long enough to go all the way around my waist, plus tie in a bow and have some extra. So I found the center of the twill tape and matched it up with the center of my pleated panel of fabric and started whip stitching it on with some thick linen thread. At the ends of the fabric panels, I turned it under like a little hem. I didn't actually sew the hem yet, but I knew I would for the next step, so I just turned it under at the top so that the hem would cleanly go up into the waistband. Once I did that to both the front and back panels, I trimmed off the excess fuzz on the edge from pre-washing, about 10 inches, which is how long I wanted my pre-side seam edge to be. If you're not familiar with 18th century petticoats, the way that they work is that there is a front and back panel and they're sewn together along the sides, and then there's a part at the top where they're not sewn together, and the way you put it on is to take the back, which has these long ties, tie it around your waist, and then take the front and put it on and tie it around your waist on top, and then tuck the tails in. For that, you need the top section to be finished. So I did a little hem by machine on the top for the first 10 inches. Then I sewed the rest of the seam with a French seam on my machine. Then I trimmed the bottom edge to be flush because I had some of the edges overhanging just a tiny bit, and did a hem by hand with some linen thread on the bottom. And I didn't actually get any footage of hemming this skirt, so you'll have to believe me and just look at the finished hem. I also did a little hem on the ends of the twill tape so they wouldn't continue to unravel and fall apart. And that was it. That is this outfit complete. I feel like it needs some accessories. I may need to work on accessorizing, but otherwise I think it's super cute and it is you know, a very Ren Faire kind of vibe. I know Ren Faire season is kind of coming to a close and I'm a little bit late with this. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Let me know if you enjoy wearing corsets, if you find the lengthy process of putting on stays to make you wear them less, and if you found any solutions for that. I'd love to hear from you, and I will see you next time. Bye!